So, please take the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, so I hope that you had a quality lunch and you are ready now to continue in our great conference. And the subject of this debate in the Havels room, I would say, is very attractive and a theme which is broadly discussed in the, I would say, every European saloon and will remain to be so at least until the November, the US elections and its aftermath, so what we can expect from the United States as an important pillar of the Western world. You know, there are many theories. There are those who are expecting that it will go as business as usual. There are those who believe that, or maybe are afraid that United States are going to turn into complete isolation. There are those who are trying, you know, to find which kind of a model of Walter Russell Mead, you know, which classified the four types of the US foreign policy: Hamiltonian, Jacksonian, Jeffersonian. What was the fourth one?
Lincolnian.
No.
Ben and Jerry's.
Wilsonian.
Wilsonian. Okay, yes.
So which kind of those streams we can expect it to dominate? And the four invited guests are here to try to provide some of the answers to this. And I would start with a simple question to each of the panelists to kick off the debate. And logically, we are in Prague, and we have here Jan Lipavský, the Czech foreign minister, so I think the power says that he should start. Jan is perhaps the youngest foreign minister in the history of this country. So, you know, for many it was a surprise 3 years ago when he was appointed. Not so much for me, because I remember him as a student of PSSI, the Prague Security Studies Institute, and he was already that time very skilled and talented boy. And meantime, he grew up and assumed the responsibility, I would say, in a very responsible and professional manner. So just a couple of weeks ago, there was a small government crisis because one of the five parties, the Pirates, had decided to leave the coalition. And he was nominated by the Pirates to the government. But on the request of four remaining parties, Jan Lipavský, as a non-partisan, decided to continue to serve. So we are all glad because it generates the stability and the good governance here. And Jan, the question to you, what you or what the Czech diplomacy, what the Czech government expect from the United States after the elections?
Thank you and welcome on. Thank you for having me at this panel, and thank you, Sasha, for such a nice introduction. There will be elections pretty soon. Now we can basically count every day till the election night, and one thing is sure, that we really don't know what will be the result of those elections. We can have our favorites, we can wish for something, but there is no clear way how to say that Kamala Harris or Donald Trump will win. And it's not only about the person which will become the next president of the USA. It's also about numbers in Congress, in Senate, and that will also define what kind of rule we will see in the USA. So if Democrats are about to win maybe presidential seat, and we are not sure, we cannot be sure about the Senate and House of Representatives, we can derive from the Biden's way that probably it will continue more or less in this regard. If Trump is elected, then it will be a different story. And we are very carefully listening what he and his aides are telling us about their visions for the USA. And of course, it's Trump. It's big words. Then how it translates into real policy. But definitely, it will put much more responsibility on Europe in terms of security. The mantra is to spend 2% of GDP on defense. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe we should be thinking about providing security, not some number, especially in times when everything has skyrocketed in its prices. So that will be part of the story. If one or the other party takes government, China will be the topic, and there will be new power to challenge China and what it's posed in the world. And for Czech diplomacy, for Czechia, it means that we have to, and of course we are talking to both sides of aisle because they need to know what are our interests, what we are doing currently, because there's a misconception about what Europe is doing for its security in the US, in US politics. That's something which is a big task for us, and we are part of that. So the world is rough. I think both presidents will understand the importance of Europe. In one case, we will really need, we really must do something extra.
Thank you very much. So now I would switch to Poland because, or the Polish voice, because Jerzy Pomianowski is a long-time director of the European Endowments for Democracy, so he is also of the European flag. But he's a Polish by origin, and hardly is there any other European country which systematically builds the strong transatlantic bond in the course of last 3 decades. Poland is a country which in the domestic politics is deeply divided. So, I still remember that, in the distant past, they were communicating across the aisle. This is not the story now. They are in the permanent war in Poland. But there is one exception, and which really unites them together, and that's the strong interest to keep the United States engaged in Europe and to keep and remain North Atlantic alliance strong. So, Jerzy, what is the Polish and your own expectation from the United States after these very important elections?
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for this question, and thank you very much for invitation and hosting the Forum 2000, which is my favorite conference, and I love to come back to Prague, and this is not the first time I'm here. Yes, I'm a holder of the Polish passport, but for the last 10 years I'm in Brussels running European Endowment for Democracy. But your question is very relevant, so let me share a few words, especially that having this independent position in Brussels, I can be less attached to the official statements of the Polish diplomacy in this respect. First, let me make a general remark that election always has an impact on many issues, election results, and this is the nature of democracy. And we should not be surprised that the election result in the United States will have an impact on transatlantic relationships. At the same time, it is very important to state exactly the opposite, that in democracy, not everything is decided by the result of the election. There is something much more stable than just election result. There are interests and institutions. And here I would say that although I'm looking, of course, with a great interest to the result of election. I also know that there is a huge, I would say, sector or activities that are across Atlantic that regardless of the result of the election will continue. So here I can naturally switch to my specific field, which is democracy support. And just to share with you that, for example, with the democracy support, we have enormously elaborated coordination and dialogue between institutions on both sides of the Atlantic that is led by European Endowment for Democracy on the European side and the National Endowment for Democracy on the American side. And this dialogue brings together many actors, both sides of the political scene with the different affiliations, and we are quite successfully managing a lot of important issues that are specifically important for us. Similar activities we would see in the security sector, similar activities we see in the economy. So if we look into the role of president in the American system, definitely what we called, especially in the first term of the Donald Trump, Twitter diplomacy, we can wait or expect sometimes shocking statements or strange statements or something that will not necessarily will make happy one or another part of the society in this or that country. Nevertheless, I believe that there is a very important core business between both sides of the Atlantic that will stay rather on the course. At the same time, I also see certain challenges and a weakness potentially. The President Biden started his term with the Summit for Democracy. And then Samantha Power has announced a program for USA, the Democracy Delivers. So there were a very strong narrative, very strong language that was contradicting the alliance of non-democrats, the alliance of dictators who are trying to undermine our values. I may expect that if President Trump wins, then we will have less of those statements, that we have less strong this layer of, let's say, spoken message. And at the same time, as we compare the first term of the President Trump, we saw that different instruments and different activities and institutions, they were still on the course. They were doing their job. So I always hesitate with this kind of dramatic approach where people say, okay, the change of the president will change everything. No, I don't think so. But at the same time, I definitely see also the challenges with the change of narrative, giving too much space for non-democratic messaging, for all kind of instrumentalization of certain agendas. That is a real challenge that will make, for example, our work, Democracy Support Committee work, globally more difficult.
Thank you so much. And now we will ask about the opinion Endowment, which visited us from the Ukraine. Ukraine is certainly the country where is very much at stake right now and in the near future. We, I think, are all here of the opinion that the Russian aggression must be contained and Ukraine must be supported. And we are by far not at the end of the road. The goal is still needs to be fulfilled. So many questions about Ukraine with the relations to the United States after the elections is emerging because, you know, the American assistance, in particular the military one, was pretty important. So Alyona Getmanchuk comes from Kiev, where he's a founder and longtime director of a Center for New Europe. She's also a visiting fellow at the Atlantic Council, so has the American connection. So what is the Ukrainian expectation from the United States after the elections? Alyona, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. That's an honor and pleasure to be a part of this panel. And since we are in Prague, I would use this opportunity to say thank you to Minister Lipavsky, to Czech government, to Czech president, to all Czech people for supporting Ukraine. We feel your support. We appreciate your support. Thank you for being with us for last three years, but for almost 11 years of Russia's invasion to Ukraine. Coming back to the US, first, you, Alexandr, mentioned that Ukraine is at stake now, yes, and that's why we don't have luxury, unfortunately, to wait until November 5th, to wait until inauguration date, to wait until the new government is formed. And I hate the idea that, you know, European security should become a hostage of 9,000 or 10,000 Pennsylvania voters, with all of the respect to all American voters. But I don't think that European security should become a hostage of the voting in the US. That's why we in Ukraine, we don't have this luxury to wait. We still have a really short list of issues we hope to solve under President Biden, including green lighting for deep strikes, including more air defense capabilities for Ukraine, maybe even developing an algorithm for creating this air defense shield over part of western and southwestern part of Ukraine, including unlocking Ukraine's invitation into NATO, because we are convinced that Joe Biden's presidential legacy would be maybe the most powerful presidential legacy among all democratic presidents, US presidents, if under his presidency Ukraine would be granted NATO invitation with a clear algorithm of accession process. And actually a fundamental issue for Ukraine now is security guarantees, real security guarantees, and which means again, invitation and accession to NATO, even in the form of gradual accession, because we are convinced that whichever path will lead to the end of the war, for Ukraine it must lie through security guarantees. Second, what we see that the gap between two candidates, presidential candidates, is big in their rhetoric on Ukraine, because I'm talking now exclusively about Ukraine and their attitudes towards the end of the war and support of Ukraine. So the gap between them in terms of rhetoric is very big, but in terms of substance, I'm not sure that the gap is as big as in terms of rhetoric. Maybe the biggest difference, what we see so far between two candidates, that Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, the same as President Biden, they think that Ukraine should initiate potential negotiations. Ukraine should decide where, when, and how the war should be ended, but former President Trump.
He was a president.
Yeah, he's former president. Donald Trump actually thinks that he can be a person who could initiate those talks, and he knows how to do that. And if you ask me what kind of president Ukraine, of course, US president Ukraine would like to deal with, I would say that we would like to deal with the president who would not be paralyzed by fear of Putin, that Ukraine would like to deal with a president who would be able to erase Putin's red lines, not to enhance them. We would like to deal with a president who would encourage European states who are ready for like bolder steps than the US to do more, not to discourage them, or even maybe forbidden in some cases to do like bolder steps, like it was with President Macron initiative, or like it was in some other cases. And of course, we would love to deal with a president who understands that Ukraine is waging a war not against Russia alone. Russia alone was in 2014. Russia alone was probably in the first months of large-scale war. But now it's Russia plus China plus North Korea plus Iran. And the longer war lasts, actually, the more coordination and more cooperation we see between them. And now we are witnessing not only North Korean missiles in Ukraine, but North Korean manpower is going to appear on the battlefield in Ukraine. And of course, we would love to deal with a president who would be open to invite Ukraine, if President Biden is not going to do it until his term, into NATO and to start accession process for Ukraine, because as I mentioned, for Ukraine is now a fundamental issue, and without security guarantees there would be no peace, no stability, no end of war, and most probably there would be no negotiations, because invitation Ukraine to NATO could serve as the quickest and way to persuade Putin's to start real negotiations, not Ukraine's capitulation or surrender, like some people dream in Moscow, but real negotiations.
Okay, thank you very much. So you mentioned to be the hostage of a couple of thousands of the voters in Pennsylvania. So, you know, we believe and do things strategically. You know, it looks a bit absurd. But even when I have a memory when I was campaigning for the NATO enlargement in the first way, and here we were asking Americans not to engage in a war, but to engage in something, you know, what would prevent us from the war, that many of those conversations were pretty absurd. For example, I was in Texas trying, you know, to engage Kay Bailey Hutchison. She was a Republican senator from Texas. Later, she was ambassador to NATO too, but it was in the middle of the 90s. And, you know, we had a conversation. I was marketing Central Europe, you know, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, although Slovakia was not part of the team, you know, because of Mečar. So we are 50 million markets, so, you know, that strong and committed. And she said, you know, but Russia, it's a market of 150 million people. And we need to export tobacco. And they are smoking more than you. So I promised here to smoke more to the end of my life. And I'm honoring that commitment. So just, you know, sometimes if the realpolitik meets the strategic thinking, it's not easy. James J. Carafano, you know, we are discussing the United States, and it would be a shame to discuss this with the Americans. So we are very glad to have a guest from Washington here. JJ is a long-time a political scientist and operator from Heritage Foundation, which is a very well-known and respected think tank. It's a think tank which is closer to the Republican. It's no secret. he's not, you know, we met just a couple of weeks ago for a dinner here. So I said, JJ, you know, you are here for the second time. He said, no, I'm already in Prague for 5th time this year. So, you know, that's a surprising positive thing, because sometimes, you know, there is this impression that the Americans are no more coming to Europe, and in particular the Republicans, they do not know where, you know, Kiev is or whatever. So this is definitely not true about you. You are an expert and political scientist, so give us your brief assumptions, you know, what can happen after the US election if Democrat win and if Republican wins.
Right. So I'm not a Republican, and so we're a conservative think tank, and I don't speak for candidate Trump. I'm not on the transition team. Haven't actually talked to the president for quite a while, but I do follow both sides really, really closely. I did want to say, because I never realized, everybody I know in the foreign ministry is named Jan. Is that a requirement, or? It does make things easy. So especially after you've been to Prague like 5 times. I just put the bottom line up front. It doesn't matter who is going to win the presidential election. The United States is not leaving NATO, and it's not abandoning Ukraine. That's just factually true. I can absolutely, speak to that from the side of Mr. Trump. I was on the presidential transition team in 2016. There was no plan to leave NATO. I worked with them when they were in office for 4 years. There was no plan to leave NATO. We talked a lot about their plans for a second term. There was no plan to leave NATO. I've talked to all the inside people that I can find in the Trump world. There's no plan to leave NATO. So there may be a plan to leave NATO, but it's not there. The other thing I would say is, you pointed this out as well, this is a domestic, as most elections are, this is a domestic election. The top 5 issues are energy, the economy, immigration, crime, and abortion. And there's not a foreign policy issue really in the top 10. Ukraine is not in the top 20. You may have heard different rhetoric from both sides, but hardly either side actually ever talks about Ukraine. This is not a bad thing. It's just saying it's not a foreign policy election, and whoever wins will, I think, have a tremendous amount of authority to set the foreign policy that they think is right for the American people. It's not necessarily they're going to be forced in a direction before the political forces are driving them. It's actually the opposite. Whoever wins will have a mandate that they've elected, and they'll have the confidence in the American people to move forward on that. You made a good point about it's not just the president, it's the Congress. It's very, all the numbers say it's going to be a Republican Senate, at least for 2 years. Republican Senate actually has been pretty solid on NATO and Ukraine, and I would expect it to continue that way. So the other thing I would say up front is we often talk about this thing is America's pivoting to China, which I just want to, is something that's a bit, it's a bit nonsensical in a way, right? First of all, militarily, there's nothing to pivot. 70% of the US Navy is already in the Indo-Pacific. So if we pivoted the Navy to the Indo-Pacific, there wouldn't be anything in the Med, there wouldn't be anything opening in the Straits of Hormuz or in the Red Sea. So there's no Navy to pivot. 90% of the US Army is permanently stationed in the United States because we don't really have enough Army to pre-position any major force in any theater. Our Air Force is stationed globally, which is actually to our advantage because we're one of the few air forces that actually deploys globally. So it's actually good to have an air force spread around because you can pretty much get anywhere. And our Space Force can't pivot because they're in space. So, militarily, there's just not much there to happen. But, we've seen, to be honest, we've had 4 presidents now, both 2 Republican and 2 Democrat, who've talked about this idea about this major political geographic shift into the Pacific. And every one of them has wound up right back in Europe and the Middle East. And there's a reason for that, which is, first of all, these are also critical strategic theaters. And if you're just concerned about China, they're all connected in the China perspective. So one of the things I would say, the one, from a Republican side, and I'll just speak to that for a second, and I'll talk about Harris real quick. From Republican side, I don't think NATO and Ukraine are the #1 issues on day one. at all on foreign policy. I think the #1 issues are the Middle East, because it's a dumpster fire, and Latin America, because it's a major extension of our southern border and those issues. Those are the issues that I think the president's going to really have to jump on first. And one of the things I think that we don't pay enough attention to is when we say, well, if the United States is tough on Russia and tough on Iran, that's actually, tough on China and tough on Iran, that's actually going to help, I think, with the Russia problem. So I think there's lots of collateral goodness there in foreign policy. On the Harris administration, I think everybody says, well, it'll just be a kind of a continuation because it'll kind of be the same people and they're kind of run the same policy. And it's true, there's an enormous amount of continuity from Obama to Biden to Harris. But I think there are several areas where even if Harris just wanted to continue the same foreign policies, I think they're going to be challenged. One of them, I think, is Ukraine. I think if there's a common concern among conservatives in the United States, it's not about Ukraine, it's about the frustration, what they perceive as the lack of a plan for the Biden administration on how to move forward, other than just kind of throwing money at it. That's not going to go away, and it's actually probably going to spread to the Democratic Party. So the notion of we're just going to keep doing this without finding a way to resolve and bring greater security and stability, I think that's going to be a challenge. I don't think the Middle East policy is sustainable. And I mean, even if you want to do that, I think just blindly engaging Iran's not going to work. So you have to do something like that. I don't think our energy policies are sustainable. I think there's an enormous concern in the United States about the forced transition of green energy and trying to hit the net zero goals. I don't think that's sustainable. And I also think, just globally speaking, there are a lot of more conservative leaders in the world today. And so the notion that a progressive leader from America is going to come into office and everybody's going to agree with them on everything, I don't think that's true. So I think policies would have to change. And I just want to end on this thing because part of the reason why I'm extremely hopeful is actually because of the people that are seated here. First of all, the key to the future stability of the Eastern Front, which is really key to the stability of Europe, is right here. It's Poland and Ukraine. The reason why I'm confident that the U.S. isn't going to abandon Ukraine is name me the scenario where America is better off if Vladimir Putin is controlling Ukraine. And the answer is you can't, because there isn't one. So a free and independent Ukraine that can defend itself is actually the greatest contribution to NATO's Central Front, because what is Russia going to do? They're going to invade NATO and drive by the Ukrainian army and wave to them as they're heading in? Well, that's not going to happen. So free and independent Ukraine is both the greatest guarantee for a future for Ukraine, but it also contributes massively to the front. What Poland is doing is absolutely critical, because it literally has become the cornerstone of the frontier of NATO, much in the way West Germany was in 1989. And what's really remarkable now is we've had two very, very different governments in Poland, a very conservative government and now a progressive government, equally committed to modernization, and a Polish people that are committed to that. I think that's game-changing. And part of the reason why I've been to the Czechia so many times is I think from an American perspective, in many ways, Czechia is almost like the perfect country. Geographically, it's right in the middle of the center of the front of Europe, which from a security standpoint is absolutely where the game is. And politically, the Czechs, I think, are right in the middle. And quite honestly, I find them to be the most realistic, the most pragmatic. So a lot of times, I say when I tell Americans, if you want to go to Czechia, talk to the Czechs, and you probably get not just an honest view, but a kind of a pragmatic, realistic view of how that moves forward. And what I have to say is when I've come and had conversations here, and I go back and I talk to both Democrats and Republicans, I don't feel a lot of disconnect between what I'm hearing here and what people think is the right thing to do there. So I'm pretty optimistic.
I will not release you such in a simple way. Look, if you now try to think, imagine that, look, either Kamala is winning or Donald is winning. And, you said that pivot is not a big deal. But imagine, U.S. basketball team either under Kamala or under Donald. There is some, Asian Shaquille O'Neal, and then they are the point guards in Kiev, in Prague, or in Warsaw. And what is your recommendation that, in this scenario of democratic victory or the Republican victory, what you recommend them, the Ukrainians and the Europeans, should do to attract enough attention and generate enough interest, let's say, beyond, let's say, regular business as usual?
Well, I mean, I think the foreign minister already said the key thing, which is true regardless if it's a Republican or Democrat, which is a sustained European commitment to NATO is absolutely vital. And it's not about politics. I mean, the United States has 3 major theaters in Western Europe, the greater Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. If you just look at the number, we do this thing every year because of the U.S. Index of military strength. We don't have the capacity to fight in 2 major places at once, let alone 3. And the notion of, so you prioritize, but prioritize doesn't mean you abandon 2 fronts in order to focus on the 3rd. That's just kind of nonsensical. If you think, during World War II, for example, and we said defeat Germany first because we didn't have enough resources to do everything. But in the first year of the war, we actually sent more men and material to the Pacific than we did to Europe, for the simple reasons that if the Japanese controlled the first and second island chains, the United States would always be cut out of Asia as a power. We'd never fight our way back in. We stabilized that theater, and that's what created the resources that allowed us to focus on Western Europe. So in many ways, an American president's going to be looking for the same thing. What do I need to do to stabilize those 2 theaters if I want to increase over here? So the Middle East is a different set of problems because it's really about what do you do about Iran? And I think largely the big variable there is what the United States does. But here, it's clearly the defense of the Eastern Front. And I think that argument's kind of been solved. When you hear about, well, Europeans need to do more, the fact is most Europeans are and have committed to doing that. So I don't think that's a real argument. And then the question is what are the kinds of things that we bring to the table that really enhance security over time? And those are the kind of things that I think America can contribute and in partnership with the Europeans. So I think we're done on that. And look, I think regardless of whether it is a Republican or Democrat, Europeans need to come to the table and say, this is what we think we should do. And actually, I think this is less of an issue in the NATO context or in the Ukraine context. I think it's a big issue in the China context. I think because at some point, we're going to have to align on a common strategy on China. And I think, I hear lots of reasons why we can't do that. Well, we want to do business with China. We don't want to get dragged into a great power struggle. This isn't our problem. But I think the reality the reality is the reason why Europe has a difficult answer to that question is I don't think there's a realistic, feasible, credible vision for the future of Europe that gives them the foundation to answer that question. I look at things like the Draghi report, for example, that I think would just make Europe less competitive. I look at the Commission on the Future of Europe that's going to push centralization, but I don't think that's actually going to deliver economies of scale. And I'm not sure any of those things are achievable. So this, to me, is the greatest European challenge, which who are we and where are we going? Because that, I think, is a prerequisite to answering the really big unanswered question is, really, how do we deal with China? And if you're concerned about human rights, which we all are, this is the greatest human rights abuser in the world. This is undermining our economies and our democracies. At some point, we have to kind of get on the same sheet of music.
Okay, so it's now time to respond this challenge. So who is volunteering the first, Jan?
So I will say nothing new. I presented here in Prague when NATO informal ministerial was convened here this May, and at that time I was quite clear, loud and clear that we need a common strategy to contain Russia, and that's where I see a little bit of optimism, because your vision for the future American president is that both of them, they have at least some kind of, they will have a vision for this kind of strategy. And of course, any kind of strategy in such a situation needs a global leadership, which is the role of the USA. We know that, and I think this is something which I really expect that the American elections will change. One way or the other, I don't believe in a one-day peace solution. I think this is something which will be confronted with reality. And I always say that first we need to have a security for Europe, for Czech citizens, for Ukraine, for our Western society, and then peace. The other way around, you will have a bad peace which will not bring security and create future problems. So.
Alina?
I would say that one thing we in Ukraine mostly agree, even with some people who are promoting, some people from Republican Party or close to Republican Party who are promoting Asia only, not Asia first, but Asia only approach, that Europe should take care of its own security, and Europe should take leadership on the efforts to provide security for the continent. And Ukraine, after becoming candidate country for EU candidate country, European Union candidate country, we feel a co-responsibility for Europe's future. And from my perspective, Europe and European Union should also feel this co-responsibility for Ukraine's future. And sometimes we feel that it's not like that at the moment. Hopefully it will change. But when we talk to those people who are promoted Asia first or Asia only approach, we are explaining that yes, we agree that Europe should lead all of those efforts in terms of providing security for the continent, but Europe cannot do it right now. And we need a smooth transition. So, and they actually agree. So we can talk, we can explain. And I think even with NATO invitation and NATO membership for Ukraine, I think if there is reorienting, if there would be a reorientation to China, to Asia region, you know, Ukraine would be extremely helpful. Ukraine as a member of NATO would be extremely helpful for the US with her ability to replace some American troops in Europe with Ukraine's combat-ready large army. I think that it would be much more easier for Europe to take care of its own security without the US in distant future. If this day would come that Europe should take care of its own security, I'm pretty sure that with Ukraine, with Ukrainian army, which is the biggest, the strongest combat-ready army in Europe now, it would be much more easier to do. So please consider this option when considering Ukraine's invitation to NATO and accession to NATO, because it's better to have Ukraine as a part of NATO and deterring China, deterring other threats, than probably to have Ukrainian army as a part of another alliance. We are afraid of even thinking about that, but we have to now to think in on which side Ukrainian army could appear, you know, if there would be a potential confrontation between China and the US.
Before I would switch the floor to you, maybe inter-question, you know, just Ukraine. Our assistance to Ukraine, I mean Western assistance to Ukraine, military, it's maybe 6-to-4 ratio for 60% US, 40% Europe in the guns. In the economic assistance, it's the opposite, maybe even more in favor of Europe. If you think, you know, with 5 years horizon, which kind of a ratio on the military assistance to Ukraine is sustainable, you know, for the US to keep the engagement, to keep us, you know, on the board with having a common strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think...
For 6-4 or to have...
Yeah, I think it's the wrong question. I don't think it's actually the level of assistance to Ukraine that's actually the pace setter. I mean, you often hear about these numbers, but when you look at our gross spending on defense, and when you look at our macro spending, actual spending for Ukraine is not a pacing item. It's more a question of what I think the big variable is going to be in the future.
But there was a big fight in the House about this small...
Well, you know, but there wasn't. I mean, this is the one thing we don't talk about. There were lots.
President Duda.
No, it wasn't over Ukraine. I mean, there were lots of fighting on lots of spending. I mean, Israel money was in there, Ukraine money in there, and most significantly the border issue there. So there was a lot of stuff mixed in that pot. But at the end of the day, you have to remember, Donald Trump was already the presumptive candidate for the Republican presidency. If Donald Trump did not want to provide aid to Ukraine, all he had to do is say every Republican that votes for that bill is not a friend of mine, and that bill would have failed. And the fact that he didn't do that sent a very clear signal that he actually wants Ukraine to be in as strong a position as possible when he comes in office, because that's his greatest position of strength, because then it's his problem and he has to deal with it. I think the big variable here, and the one we have to work on, is rebuilding Ukraine. Ukraine can have a very significant defense industry. And Ukraine, if we can get the population to move back, can have a very strong and sustainable military. And you can call this the Israeli model if you want, but one of the things that has really contributed to the survival of Israel in the last 30 years is, in the end of the day, alliances, no alliances, military aid, from all great. But at the end of the day, Israel had an inherent internal defense capability to defend its nation that I think made all the difference. To me, that's the big variable. What I'm constantly looking at are what are ways where we can speed up the reconstruction of Ukraine, both infrastructure and the defense industry. I think that's the biggest thing. So it's not so much about foreign aid. It's about what we invest in Ukraine that makes its defense sustainable over time.
But in that debate in the House about releasing the money in the spring, I remember, you know, Czech Prime Minister played some role in convincing the Speaker of the House. But Polish President Duda has played a very important role in talking to Donald Trump in the United States, and in fact helped to convince him to give, if not the green, at least the orange light for the vote. So a question, you know, beyond the common question to everybody, additional one. Just if you imagine that Donald Trump is going to win and will be the president, who, according to you, in Europe is the best equipped mentally to communicate with him? Because I remember the first presidency, you know, the body language by Angela Merkel, by Macron, it was a difference. So, you know, your president played some role. So who is in Europe best equipped to effectively communicate with Donald Trump that Donald Trump would respect him or her?
Well, thank you for this question. I think I should go back to political studies and the political psychology,
you know, I cannot ask, you know, the member of the government, but
to acquire some extra knowledge and competence on it. You know, I am always hesitant in answering such a question because I remember those. Sorry for this comparison.
You get the money from the European Parliament. So
no.
Be careful, yeah?
I just sorry for that comparison, but I remember those politicians who were queuing to convince Putin not to enter the war. There was a large group of politicians who each of them claimed they have a special charm to convince Putin about something. They all failed, So I don't know who was their advisor, not me. So I wouldn't tell them go and negotiate with Putin not to wage the war, because this is something you are not capable of doing. So in a sense, if we try to put too much of, I would say, weight into the personal charm and the politics where the real interests matters, I think we're committing a simplification and mistake. So in a sense, I would say there will be politicians in Europe, if Donald Trump is again a president of the United States, they will find the language, and they have to also think what kind of language in order to pinpoint interest. And just to give you a short story from Poland, as you are all calling all the times this Polish aspect of my presence here, which I very much enjoy. I'm proud of my country. When Donald Trump was a president and the conservative government of Kaczynski party was in power, the government and the parliament was working on a special act to reduce presence of internationally owned media in Poland. Basically, it was called in the political discourse in Poland like TVN Act, which was about one specific TV station that was owned by Discovery and was quite independent and important for the political discourse in Poland. And you guess what? They stopped because someone in Washington told them that it's not good, dear friends in the conservatism, that you are now attacking US interests in your country for your own political interest. So the act was slowly silenced and not continued, and the independent TV was able to function, and it contributed to the political loss of the Kaczynski party, no doubt, because they were exposing some important scandals and other problems that every government faces, and that government also was facing. So interests are crucial. Poland now allocates almost 5% for defense spendings. It's double, more than double, than expected from Donald Trump. We're going to have, together with Ukraine, if Ukraine wins the war, and we believe it will, the two strongest armies. When? Sorry. After victory, that's true. Sorry for this mistake. Two strongest armies in the Europe will be Polish and Ukrainian. That is also about modernization, about defense industry, because those monies are not only procurements of American products, but also investments in the industry in Poland. And there will be a lot of investment in the military industry, defense industry in Ukraine as well. So these are a very concrete facts that drives the future security, I would say, image security, a picture of the Europe and of that part of the Europe. And finally, I would like to change the subject totally, because that is an element that is missing when we talk about China, when we talk about different policies. What I feel, and that is more field of my competence, neither Biden, neither Trump, nor even Europe is ready for a scenario that Russia collapses. And this is what is worrying me a lot, because that part of that absence in a strategic thinking is something stunning. And this is something that I don't understand. How come such a important issue is not properly dealt and addressed, and there is no strategy toward such a possibility? And in my view, it's a real possibility within 5 to 10 years from now, because the system and the way Russia is governed and the way it engages in the foreign policy is non-sustainable in the long term.
You are right that this is the issue which focused the attention exclusively in Poland. In the European Parliament, you know, I had a friend, Anna Fotyga, who she was a former foreign minister, in fact, very effective in proposing the various revolution in favor of the various arrested human rights fighters across the world. And she organized a conference on the small nations and regions in Russia. Everybody was afraid to sponsor that because everybody was reading that this is the strategy of disintegration. I was the only taking a courage to understand that. So Poles are thinking about this scenario. I can confirm for the others it's rather a headache because of the nuclear and other questions which would have to be solved. But we are Forum 2000. We should finish in 5 minutes, no later. Mr. Minister has to leave. So let's now drift away from security. And last question is, you know, what do we expect from the future U.S. government? Whether we can something expect in turn in the playground of promoting democracy and freedom all over the world? Because it's now playing short-handed in the world dominated by realpolitik. I have no illusion that it's gonna to be different after in the next 5 years, but at least, you know, 1, 2, 3 sentences in this direction as a farewell for this panel. So who is going?
Maybe
you will start. You are paid
that is,
for this. So.
That is my Brussels-based competence, definitely. And I think I have mentioned this in the first intervention. Definitely depends who wins the election in the United States. We will have a change of the so-called narrative. We will have less democracy word used in the international messaging, in the national politics, and it will be given, especially I am talking about if Trump wins, there will be more space for so-called non-democratic narratives to simply reach out and be promoted. And that is in a contrast of institutional engagement, which I believe will continue. So that element definitely I would see as what you were mentioning, the rhetoric. The rhetoric may be different. With regard to Brussels, I see now indeed a strong shift toward realpolitik, pragmatism, which I call naivety. Because if someone thinks you can address security issues, you can address climate change, you can address migration, you can address economic growth without democratic governance, you are simply, you know, committing same mistake and same complacency that was previously again and again. You cannot make an honest deal with the dictators without a leverage. You have to have a leverage. Leverage is civil society. Leverage is independent media. Leverage is ways, always, to keep those guys accountable, whether they are in China, in Egypt, in any other place. So that is something that we are, as a democracy support community, trying to communicate and saying pragmatism, yes, but a pragmatism that is based on 2 or 3 piano you play at the same time, not the one piano.
Yeah, look, I think we all love democracy. I would just say, from a conservative perspective, I think the notion of democracy promotion is recognized as a relatively bankrupt and corrupt idea. I think even under the Biden administration, they have a summit for democracy. They don't invite democracies they don't like just because they don't like their politics. They engage with a lot of regimes which are quite onerous, including Iran, which they gave hundreds of billions of dollars to. And so I think Republicans are done with the rhetoric. They're more interested in outcomes. I said the number one thing that I would expect from a conservative administration is that they would hammer the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians, who are the 3 biggest purveyors of the illiberal world, which would be a big help to everybody. And then I don't shy away from the word pragmatic, and I agree with you that freedom and security and economic growth all go in a bundle. But I'd rather see people focus on pragmatic projects. We haven't talked about the 3 Cs initiatives, for example, which I think would bring a lot of not just security and prosperity, but also economic integration and create opportunities to extend that to the Caucasus and Central Asia. So I would actually think that pragmatic might actually do a better job promoting democracy than at least what the United States has done in the last 4 years, rhetorically claiming it's pushing for democracy promotion.
Regardless who becomes the next US president, Ukraine will follow a democratic path. It's for sure, because, you know, all attempts to turn Ukraine into authoritarian or almost authoritarian states failed in Ukraine, and Ukrainian society would never expect anything else than democracy and democratic governance. In terms of our cooperation and partnership with the US, we value freedom wording even more than democracy wording, but we also we are putting a lot of emphasis on justice wording, and because we are now thinking and we are focusing on reaching out just peace, fair peace. It's not about another fragile ceasefire like we already had, and which actually led us to even to broader and more brutal large-scale war with Russia. So freedom and justice, democracy, freedom and justice, I would say that these are the key words in our partnership with the US.
Jan?
I think promotion of human rights, values of democracy, freedom of speech is our strategic choice in a world of global confrontation. It is a part of our identity, part of who we are, how our societies are built upon, what kind of relationship do we have. And 30 years of globalizations erase some kind of necessity of doing that. And Forum 2000 is a good reminder that even in the time of globalization, there were people who wanted to work on this topic, but now it is becoming more and more critical for us, for our identity, and to make a sense of the fight which is now physically taking place in Ukraine, but it's global. Hybrid warfare can be observed in Europe, Poland, Czechia, Baltics, you name it. And also part of that is strategic communication, so projects like Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which sits in here Prague, but it's a global network, maybe needs to find a new way how to communicate, how to reach out to broad public, but still it has its relevancy, and the relevancy will be there. And I think soon, as the global confrontation will continue, and we have, it's not only not Ukraine and Europe and the Middle East, but we see a lot of tension in Asia, which may soon spark into something bigger. And there is no way how to say that it won't happen, because we see those drills, and it's South China Sea, Taiwan Straits. So we have to be ready to defend our way of life, and this is integral part of that. And it also shows way for people in countries where the democracy is not flourishing, what to do next. So.
Well, thank you very much. It's a nice finish of our conversation. So it's a Lipavský doctrine, and I would just enrich this with kind of a Roosevelt colorally. President Roosevelt, but don't make mistake, not Franklin Delano, who was the author of the Green Deal, but Theodore, who was in power at the beginning of the 12th century. He once famously said, speak softly, but carry a big stick. And this is something what I think the both US contenders for the White House, as well as everybody in Europe, should constantly keep in the mind. So to promote those values, it's different whether you are doing this from the position of weakness or from the position of the strength. So we all should take this in mind, and in the US, in Europe, because otherwise, nice words can be better with laughs among the various dictators, and this is not what we want. So thank you, Alyona, thank you, Jan, thank you, JJ, thank you, Jerzy, thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you, Sasha. Yes.